told there's a screen back there somewhere, but I can't see it from here, so... Oh, it's way up there. Wonderful, okay. We just heard about the beginning of Ellen White's Christian experience, and I have been asked to talk about what happened after she died. So we're kind of doing the two ends of her life, and so we'll be talking for a few minutes about the Ellen G. White estate and what we do. But first I want to thank Dr. Burt for that presentation. I've heard him give it before, and I'm moved every time. So the Ellen G. White estate, who is it, what is it, how did we come into existence? In the General Conference Working Policy, it states very clearly that the Ellen G. White estate is the proprietor of Ellen White's writings. It's the owner and the proprietor of her writings. The White estate is a separate legal corporation from the General Conference. If you try to find us on an organizational chart of the General Conference, you will be looking for a long time because we're not there. Why are we not there? Well, because in Ellen White's last will and testament, she left instructions to trustees. She left actually her writings to 5 trustees with instructions as to what they should be doing with her writings after her death. She signed her last will and testament in 1912 and died then in 1915. So the document, the legal document, under which the Ellen G. White estate still operates is her last will and testament, along with some actions that have been taken by the church through the years asking us to do this, that, and the other thing. But we basically are governed by her last will and testament. In that will, she left, as I say, instructions. First, of course, like anybody that dies, her trustees were to make certain that her debts were paid off, and that was taken care of. She also left instructions that her materials should be translated into other languages. She left the copyrights to her materials there to the White estate. She talked about how to replace trustees in case there was a death, having no idea that we would still be here 100 plus years later, and that all the original trustees and all the second and third generation trustees have passed to the rest. She named 5 trustees originally: A.G. Daniels, who was then president of the General Conference; F.M. Wilcox, who was editor of the church paper, the Adventist Review now it's called; her son, W.C. White, who had been working with her for many, many years, was her financial officer. Well, maybe not financial in the last years, but at least he'd handled all of her book transactions, all that kind of thing. And then C.H. Jones, Charles Harriman Jones, who was the manager, they called him then, now we would call him the president of the Pacific Press, and her secretary, Clarence Chrysler, who would later go to China and serve as secretary of the division there for a number of years before his death in China. When she moved to Elmshaven, her home in Northern California, in 1900, from Australia she came, she brought with her letters and manuscripts. Some things I think it may have still been in Battle Creek that had been stored there. Anyway, she built this office building behind her home at Elmshaven, and this was the first office of the Ellen G. White estate. Now, I see if there's a pointer here. There is... well, it won't do any good because I'd be pointing that direction and I can't see here. But anyway, out behind you see a little low white building. That was the vault. They put up a concrete vault to house Ellen White's letters and manuscripts because part of the instructions that she gave her and trustees was to preserve her original materials. It's very interesting. I was going through the minutes of the Board of Trustees a few years ago, looking for some information, and I found a most interesting vote. I think this was about 1932 or 33. They decided that the concrete vault was not sufficient protection, so they voted to buy 1 fire extinguisher. Now, when you think about how the church protects its materials today with halon gas or some other system, and here we had 1 fire extinguisher in case a fire broke out in the vault. This is the interior of the vault. or the office building with the doors to the vault. You can see looking into the vault. Actually, where the bookcase is, right to the left of the entry into the original vault, they later built a second vault. So by the time the White Estate left Elmshaven, we'll come to that in a minute, why there were two vaults out behind. The original one that you can see through the doorway, and then one where the door was about where that bookcase is, straight ahead in the picture. You could see it was overflowing with all kinds of original materials. There was no General Conference archive in those days. So what was preserved about the history of the church, much of it was here at the White Estate, though of course some things would have been at the General Conference. Interestingly, the General Conference archives starts sometime around 1889. O.A. Olson seems to have been the first president that was concerned about preserving things. So before it, it was things that James White and Ellen White had preserved. And so many of the earliest documents of the church actually are in the possession of the White Estate because they've come to us by virtue of her deed of gift to the trustees of her estate. I've heard Arthur White, Ellen White's grandson, say that in those early days, it was very difficult really to determine where James White's vest pocket ended and the work of the estate or the office began. It was so close. He and the church were so intertwined, and fortunately they preserved a number of things, though with their belief in the soon coming of Christ, some things that we wish now had been preserved were not preserved because why do you need them? The Lord's going to come and we won't need them. If you go to the General Conference today and you look inside our vault at the current headquarters, I should mention, I told you I would talk about how we moved. Willie White died in 1937. The son, W.C. White, who had been Secretary of the Secretary of the White Estate for 20 years, he died in 1937. Arrangements had been made that upon his death, everything would be transferred from California at Elmshaven, in that little office building that we saw the picture of, to the General Conference, which in those days was in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and of course now it's in Silver Spring, Maryland, a few miles from where it was originally. So that's what happened. January of 1938, everything was packed up, sealed up, shipped across country in a railroad car, the padlock unlocked in Tacoma Park, and was filed away with almost nobody interested in looking at it in those days, filed away in the vault at the General Conference. That soon changed as people began to get interested in the materials that were housed in that locked vault. And Arthur White, the son of Willie White, who had been elected Secretary of the White Estate, as they called him in those days, now we call him the Director of the White Estate, but had been elected Secretary. He started as a half-time person overlooking the vault, but it soon became a full-time position. Anyway, this is the way it looks today. It will not look that way, I don't think, much longer. In fact, one of the emails that I was working on this morning was with a company that's going to be helping us redesign the vault. So to just let you know, cutting edge, we are working on upgrading the current vault. And so I don't know what's going to happen when I get home. The next day after I get home, I get to see the drawings, the plans for what this company is suggesting in terms of remodeling the inside of our vault. But the files there, one of them you can see with a page open, a drawer pulled out and a page open. Those are the unpublished letters and manuscripts of Ellen White. And the two cabinets of 6 rows each, one of which has the drawer open, actually belonged to Ellen White. She brought them back from Australia. She had them in Australia while she was down there. And then the cabinets to the left are newer, reconstructed. And I hope in this process of renovating the vault, that cabinet disappears and we get something that looks more like the original. But that time will tell. We'll see what they come up with. Anyway, so this is a view inside the vault. We also have many filing cabinets in there with materials that have been saved about the work of the White Estate, early days of the church. Many volumes from Ellen White's library that she owned originally, books that she owned, are also housed in our vault. Now I mentioned that there was a drawer open with letters and manuscripts. This is one of those drawers. They are all filed the same way with these clips, and you flip them up over the top of the clips to get to the original typescripts. Ellen White did not type anything during her lifetime. She handwrote everything, or they could be transcriptions of sermons that were taken down stenographically by secretaries. Some things have only recently actually been added to the file. It's amazing that after this many years, some of her diaries that she never saw necessary to have transcribed during her lifetime have now been typed and have been added. This has all been happening since a couple years ago when we put everything online. And when we put everything online, we wanted it to mean everything. So people couldn't come back later and say, well, where did this come from? Or where did that come from? Or why are you adding that now? So we have recently typed up letters and manuscripts that were not previously ever typed. Most of these were sermons, I think, as I understand it, that had been taken down stenographically by secretaries. There were, before somebody asked during the question and answer, yes, there were recording mechanisms. She could have had her voice recorded during the time of her life if anybody had thought it was necessary to do that, but she was not recorded. Likewise, she could have had a movie film taken of her, but we are not aware of any voice recordings or any movies of Ellen White. But we do have thousands and thousands of pages of typed, handwritten, etc. materials that she left as her legacy. As I mentioned, the copyrights of Ellen White's books were given to the White estate. Some people wonder, why did she copyright her books? Well, like anybody else, she wanted to make certain they were protected so that people didn't go in and change what she wrote. There have been a few examples. I'm thinking of one even before she died, where a man who was an education director, or don't remember what his exact title was, but he was head of education for a country in Europe, was so moved by the book Education that he copied the whole thing, had it translated, printed it in his country, added one paragraph, and put his name on it as author of the book. That's the kind of thing that copyrights protect from. So we continue to copyright her books. However, because of the copyright law in the United States, any Ellen White book that was printed originally before 1923 is now in what we call the public domain. In other words, anybody can do whatever they want with it. You can take great controversy and you can put your name on it as the author and print it, and legally there's nothing the church, the White estate, or anybody can do to you because it's in the public domain. We hope you don't do that, by the way. Steps to Christ, we don't know how many languages it's been translated into. We're aware of about 165 languages, but we know that there are supporting ministries that have also translated the book and have printed it in small numbers and small quantities for places in countries where they're working. So we really don't know how many, but we know that it's more than 165 languages. That is the most translated Ellen White book, Steps to Christ. She also left instructions for her trustees to bring out compilations as they were needed by the church. I know that some people have the idea that when the church needs a little bit more money, why they bring out a new Ellen White compilation, because they know it'll sell. Well, let me just disabuse your mind. Number one, it was Ellen White's idea that compilations be produced as the need arose in certain areas to pull together her writings on that particular topic and put them out in a compilation. Number two, there are no royalties paid on any Ellen White books. So if anybody's going to get rich off of Ellen White books, it might be a publishing house somewhere, but it's certainly not the General Conference or the White Estate. Either one, we don't get rich. Anytime you see a new compilation, we're not getting any royalties off of that. These are pictures of the current director and associate vice director, Tim Poyer, up at the top next to my picture, and the associate directors at the main office of the White Estate in Silver Spring, Maryland. We also have branch offices. Now, a branch office of the White Estate is exactly what it says. It is a branch office. We try to supply it with all the materials, except for some of the legal materials or some of the financial records that we have. But other than that, we try to supply all of our materials to our branch offices. And they are located at General Conference institutions. So once in a while, we get somebody say, how can we become a branch office? We say, well, convince the brethren to turn your institution into a General Conference institution instead of a division institution, then come talk to us. So we have 4 branch offices: Andrews, Loma Linda, IS in the Philippines, and AUA in Kenya, here in Africa. But we do have research centers. Now, a research center has basically the same materials as the branch offices. The biggest difference is that the General Conference pays for the operation of branch offices. Research centers, the General Conference helps with the salary, half of the salary and benefits of the director of the first research center in each division. So there are 13 division research centers that the General Conference helps with half of the financial remuneration of the director. The other half comes from the local either college or university or the division. That's up to them how they cover the other half of the salary. Often the division, the research center director is teaching in the religion faculty there. So it's a difference in finances. Other than that, they're basically the same, right? Research centers and branch offices. However, we do have a total of 20 research centers. Now you say you have 13 divisions, you have 20 research centers. How in the world does that happen? Well, obviously some divisions have more than one. I like to kid the presidents of the Inter-American Division, and I have more than once, kidded the presidents of the the Inter-American Division and the South American Division as having a little holy rivalry between the two divisions. And why do I say that? Well, if South America decides to open another research center, guess what? Within just a few weeks or months, we have a request from Inter-America. They want to open another one. And if Inter-America decides to open an additional research center, within a few weeks or months, we have a request from the South American Division. So each one now has 4 in their area, and if one of them opens another, my guess is we will soon have a request from the opposite one. So I call that holy rivalry. They claim there is no rivalry, but they both laugh when they're claiming it. So who knows? I guess that's all right in the work of the Lord, that kind of rivalry. There's another division or two that have 2 in their territory, but not 4. Only Inter-America and South America have 4 research centers in their territory. We are also responsible, this is not mentioned obviously in Ellen White's will, but we have our website, ellenwhite.org, or egwhitewritings.org if you're looking for the unpublished letters and manuscripts. So we maintain and update every so often our website. We have a person who that's one of his primary functions, is to keep our website operating and looking halfway contemporary, at least. Don't let it get too far out of date. We also have apps. The same person is working on apps. We actually right now on our website have about 95 or 96 Ellen White books in languages other than English. I think it's 96 if I remember correctly, and languages other than English that you can download for free from our website. Our goal is to eventually get every Ellen White book that's ever been translated in any non-English language and have it available for free downloading on our website, so that the rest of the world has the same privilege that English-speaking people have, because all of the Ellen White letters and manuscripts, books, compilations, they're all available for free downloading in English on our website, and we're trying to do that also. There's apps for your cell phone. Check us out. You'll find there's an awful lot of ways to get access to the Ellen White letters and manuscripts and the books, periodicals. Now, something else that's not mentioned in our instructions from Ellen White is that the White Estate provides tour guides to visit historic Adventist sites. And here is a familiar figure of Dr. Merlin Burt a few years back, and he's leading a tour in Oak Hill Cemetery in Battle Creek, and this tour group right in this picture is standing at the grave of James Ellen White. I won't put him on the spot because I don't remember which tour this was. My guess is they have just done a walking tour through the entire cemetery and have visited the graves. There are many graves of Adventist pioneers buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in Battle Creek, Michigan. And he, like I, when I do a tour through the cemetery, we always end up at James Ellen White's grave. Buried here, right behind him, you can see 2 low tombstones. To the left of Dr. Burt, where he's standing, is James White's grave. To the right is Ellen White's grave. And then there are other members of the family that are buried there, including all 4 of her sons, James White's parents, and a few other people that are buried in the White family plot. Just to the right of the picture are the youngest and the oldest sons of Ellen White. And I'm always moved when I think about Henry, who was 16 when he died. His little baby brother, John Herbert, or I think probably really was called Herbert during the 3 months of his life. He died in 1860. Henry died in 1863 at age 16, as I just mentioned. On his deathbed, dying of pneumonia up in Maine, Henry asked his parents if they would please, don't bury me here in Maine, take me back to Battle Creek. I want to be buried next to my little brother, so that in the resurrection, he will not feel lonely when he comes up. It gives you some idea of how real the resurrection was to even Adventist young people back a century and a half ago. And so Henry is buried right next to his little baby brother, John Herbert. Well, you also know from a dream or a vision of the night that Ellen White had what's going to be said when James and Ellen White comes up. She was shown that she saw James, she interpreted it this way, let's put it this way. She saw James coming from a dark place, looking over at her and saying, "What? You too, Ellen?" And she took that as meaning she would not live until the second coming. Up till then, apparently, she believed that she would be alive when the Lord came, but she realized she was going to sleep, which may be one explanation why the last few years of her life she really focused on getting as many books out as possible, and a number of her classics came out during those years after that night dream of the 1890s. We don't know the exact year, but it's been recorded for us that that's what she told her family. Well, let's see here. It must have been an interesting tour that Dr. Burt was giving. I can't even get this thing to move. It's so fascinating, I think, that we must stay on it. Maybe somebody back there can move the picture forward. There we go. Every 5 years or 6 years, sometimes it's 6 between, the White Estate brings out a new devotional. We're working on the next devotional, which will come out in 2021, compiled from Ellen White's writings. It's going to have an interesting theme, I think. You may or may not be aware that there are over 800 different terms, phrases, expressions that Ellen White uses in her published writings for Christ. Don't let anybody ever tell you this woman was not in love with Jesus. Anyone who can come up with more than 800 different ways to identify Christ in her writings had to be in love with the man. And we're taking those themes, those phrases that she used, and the readings for that 2021 devotional will be incorporating those phrases into the daily readings. Here we go. Okay. Some fairly recently, the oldest of these recent publications of the White Estate is Messenger of the Lord. It came out in the mid-1990s. It's still probably the best overall book. Some of you, probably many of you, are familiar with it in terms of Ellen White's life and ministry by Herbert Douglass. A couple of years ago, The Gift of Prophecy in Scripture and History came out. It's based on the symposium, the papers that were read at the symposium at Andrews a year or two ago. And I think copies are probably available here in South Africa. More recently, and or I guess about the same time, Understanding Ellen White, which is edited by Merlin Burt, Dr. Burt, came out. The two books you may wonder about, the one on the Gift of Prophecy and Understanding Ellen White. The one are the papers that were read, so they are designed more for an academic approach. Understanding Ellen White was designed specifically for members to better understand Ellen White, dealing with various issues related to Ellen White and her ministry. And then more recently, some of the stories that I told last night, other stories, the Pacific Press prevailed upon me finally, to bring out a storybook about Ellen White. And it's called Glimpses into the Life of Ellen White. It's also available in DVD of me telling the stories. Or actually, it's the other way around. I told the stories, they transcribed the stories and produced the book. That's more accurate, actually. Last year was the 125th anniversary of Steps to Christ. I don't know what this division did here. I actually assigned it to somebody else to oversee the project for our church, so I'm not sure what each division did. But many of the divisions promoted the reading of Ellen White's Steps to Christ during that year, encouraging every member to read or reread Steps to Christ during the 125th anniversary last year. A couple of other things that the White Estate is working on. Annotation project. We have started annotating all of Ellen White's earliest letters and manuscripts. When I say annotating, I mean telling you everything we know about the letter and some that we didn't previously know about it through research of census records and stuff. Who was written to? Where this person lived? What was going on at the time the letter was written? Was there a response that we have to the letter? As I say, anything that we know about the letter itself. And volume 1 of the annotated letters and manuscripts is shown there on the right, and it came out a couple years ago. We're now working on the second volume, which only goes up through 1863. And so we have a long ways to go if we're going to annotate everything, which I have my doubts that money or time will ever allow that. But anyway, we're started. It's the earliest years, by the way, that we know the least about the people and the least about the circumstances that are being discussed in the letters that have been preserved. So that's probably the most important that we started there and didn't start at the end and work back, because there have been so many students at Andrews and other places who have combed the last 20, 30, 40 years of our letters and manuscripts, that they're much better known, and the circumstances in the history of the church much better known during the later years of her life than the early years. The Ellen G. White Encyclopedia, which is a very valuable resource, it was not produced by the White Estate. The two editors are professors at Andrews University. One recently retired. But if you do not have access to this book, it doesn't tell you quite everything you want to know about Ellen White, but it's getting pretty close. I mean, there's a section in there of biographical. There's some interesting essays to begin with. There's then topical subject, a whole section, big section on all kinds of topics relating to Ellen White's writings. And so it's a very valuable resource that, as a pastor, I would think at some point you may want to have in your library. Now, a couple other things that the White Estate is involved with, and I may even actually finish a couple minutes early from watching this clock. We have recently, a couple years ago, opened a visitor center at the main office of the White Estate. I was hoping that I would have a virtual reality tour ready to show you. They've been promising it to me, but I don't have it, so I'm going to show you a few slides to give you some idea of what our visitor center looks like at the White Estate. This is the reception area when visitors come to our visitor center. You would go to the, as you're coming down the stairs to the visitor center, the White Estate's on the lower level. Why, there's a door that goes into this first room. The first room is designed like a barn. Ellen White's ministry began simply in barns, private homes, and we wanted to give that atmosphere, the simplicity of the way her message began. There is an orientation video or presentation here that's about 2.5 minutes long that kind of orients people that may not know about Ellen White's life. The sad thing is that even many Adventists know virtually nothing about Ellen White's life. You exit that room and you come into beginning the exhibit area. The first, I would say half, but the first section of the visitor center deals with Ellen White as a person, her home, her background, that kind of thing. So to the left, which you can only see partially in this picture, is about her girlhood, growing up in Portland, Maine, and incidents relating to Portland, Maine. We have very few original artifacts from that era, but we do have a couple or three things on exhibit from that area. The center panel with the red, that is her Millerite years, so roughly from 1840 to 1844. And there are materials there displayed that deal with the Millerite movement and her experience as a Millerite, including a copy of Miller's lectures that actually belonged to the pastor of the church who invited William Miller to come preach at his church. And it was at that meeting, or those meetings, that the Harmons decided to become Millerites and look for the soon return of Christ. To the right is another panel that deals with Ellen White's, the beginning of her call as the Lord's messenger. Again, there are a few artifacts on display and some pictures that were the earliest believers, the earliest ones to accept Ellen White's prophetic ministry. In that same room, if you kind of turn around from where we were just standing, a couple of panels on the right deal with Ellen White's mission years. Part of it deals with Australia, the 9 years that she was there, from 1891 to 1900, and then the other panel deals with her time in Europe from 1885 to 87. In the back of the picture is her support of her son Edson White and his work among the former slaves of the southern United States in the 1890s to very early 1900s. Right next to the red panel, just to the right of the kind of the reddish panel, are pictures of as many of Ellen White's homes where she lived at least, a few months that we know that we could find from her lifetime, and some artifacts from some of those buildings, a few that we have. This is a closer up of the section dealing with Edson White, her son, and his work of evangelizing and educating former slaves in the southern United States. Then moving on from where that other picture was, there is it's not a dress. We have no clothes that belong to Ellen White. There is apparently one garment, I shouldn't say apparently, I've seen it. There's one garment at Sunnyside. It's so fragile they don't have it on display anymore. So what we did was we had someone that makes costumes for people that like to go run around, and play like they're in the American Civil War or something. This lady was a professional costume maker. She made a costume based on a picture of a dress that Ellen White was wearing in the 1860s. And so what color should it be? I mentioned that the pictures we have of her, I mentioned last night, are all in black and white, but we do have record of her having green dresses, red dresses, purple dresses, calico dresses. So we decided red might startle some of the saints, so we went with purple or lavender. Then coming on around a melodeon, which is the kind of musical instrument that they used in the White home. Edson and Henry both like to play the melodeon for family worship. So we have an old melodeon, not the one that belonged to the Whites, but an old melodeon. And then you step out of that area and down what used to be just a plain hallway, and there's where we have exhibits that feature the main aspects of Ellen White's ministry. So you have the Great Controversy theme, which of course overarched everything she wrote about after the Great Controversy vision was given to her in 1858. And then publishing. At the end of the hall, down there in the arch, is a pulpit that she preached from. And then coming back this way that you can't see are some artifacts relating to her as a public speaker. And then all 800 and plus names that Ellen White used for Christ are displayed. You can't see that either here. But there's the picture of Christ, and behind it are all these names. Very small print, but they're all there on that particular panel. Coming on down, there are displays on health and education, two other prominent features of Ellen White's ministry. And then there is a timeline about her life, which we're hoping to be able to revise and upgrade. We've already talked with the design company. We don't have a proposal yet for changing, but we would like to upgrade the timeline. And then there is a panel about her death, her funeral, and a section about her last few months, and then her death. And 3 funerals. She had 3 funerals. One at Elmshaven the Sunday after she died on the Friday afternoon. And then the following morning down near Oakland, California, as a body was being taken to Battle Creek. It was buried in Battle Creek, Michigan, the following weekend. So there's something about the Richmond funeral and then the Battle Creek, Michigan funeral, which had 3,000 or 4,000 people attending it. There's a display also of her prominent books from the earliest down to the last ones that were produced during her lifetime. And the large mural, which I suppose most of you are familiar with. There is what I call a sound and light program. Now that's the way they called them years ago. It's very sophisticated that was done. And as people, I ask people sometimes, have you been to the White? I say, yes. Before the visitor center opened or after the visitor center opened? And they'll usually say before. And I said, then you really haven't been to the White Estate, and you certainly haven't seen the mural. The presentation is fantastic from my perspective. I remember being how shocked I was, even though I'd helped to work on the narration, the script that was used, when I actually saw what they did. If you're ever at the General Conference and have 10 minutes extra, it's about a 9-minute little showing that we have on it. Please come to see the mural, and you will see what I mean when I say if you saw it before the presentation, you really didn't see the mural. And then there is a picture of Ellen White as you're exiting the visitor center. So that is another thing that we do. We're trying to educate people about the ministry of Ellen White, and one way we've chose to do it at the General Conference is through this visitor center. Oh yes, and then there's this little activity center here that also, there's some pictures you can stand behind and get your picture taken with or take your picture with the White family, etc. Another area, this is the one I'll close with, is Adventist Heritage Ministry. The White Estate Board of Trustees is the constituency for Adventist Heritage Ministry. Adventist Heritage Ministry owns and operates 4 historic Adventist sites. Historic Adventist Village in Battle Creek, which is going to be hosting annual council next October in the village. We're pitching a large tent that will hold about 600 or 700 people, and we will be having seminars and all there on Friday and Sabbath afternoon before annual council begins on Sunday. In fact, this beard is getting ready for that because Ted Wilson has asked the leaders who are going to be on the platform to please grow beards. So you're in the spirit. I've never had a beard before in my life. And if you see me going like this, it's because it still feels very strange to me. Anyway, but that's all. That's Historic Adventist Village. Right in the middle is the James Snell White House. It's the oldest landmark, Adventist landmark, still standing in Battle Creek. It's where she finished writing the first edition of the Great Controversy. But you see a schoolhouse. Every one of these buildings in the village has a story distinctly associated with our heritage, either our beliefs or something outstanding about our history. Adventist Heritage Ministry also owns the William Miller Farm in upstate New York. And it was here that William Miller wrote out his sermons and went out to do his preaching in the 1830s and 1840s. And here we have our famous tour guide again with a group out on Ascension Rock. This group was standing out there where Millerites are said to have waited for the Lord to return in 1844, out behind his house. We also have Hiram Edson's barn. This is not his barn. Actually, it's his father's barn, Luther Edson's barn. Hiram's no longer stands, doesn't exist. But the Hiram Edson farm in western New York State is what we refer to as the theological birthplace of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's here where all of our major cardinal doctrines first were together. Somebody believed them here at this place. Sabbath Sanctuary, Second Coming, State of the Dead, all they were first at a meeting at the Hiram Edson farm. And then our last site is Joseph Bates' boyhood home, where he grew up in Fairhaven, Massachusetts. It's currently under restoration, and we're working on developing a visitor center by the same company that did the one at the General Conference. We're looking forward to getting it open sometime later this year or early next year, visitor center in the restored Joseph Bates boyhood home. So this is the work of the White Estates, much different than what Ellen White envisioned, but time has forced us to do some things that she could never have envisioned, and certainly in some ways, when you think about the electronic ways of sharing Ellen White's messages, certainly different than she could have ever envisioned also.